the allegations have been around for years.
Venezuela estaría sirviendo de trampolín para que personas vinculadas con el grupo terrorista Hezbollah puedan entrar a Estados Unidos y Canadá.
That Venezuela's leftist government is harboring ties to the Lebanese armed group Hezbollah, a relationship cemented by the country's late president Hugo Chavez and his friendship with Iran, and continued under his successor Nicolás Maduro. Politically, Venezuela and Hezbollah have made no secret of their mutual admiration. When late President Hugo Chavez called former U.S. President George Bush a devil, Hezbollah supporters waved his photo at rallies in Beirut. On the streets of Venezuela, Hezbollah was praised for its offensive against Israel during the 2006 war. Back then, Venezuela's current vice president, Tareck El Aissami, was a congressman.
Hoy la causa árabe se abraza con la causa de la revolución bolivariana.
Some Washington lawmakers have warned about Hezbollah's supposed reach posing a security threat.
A nation that is trafficking and selling passports and travel documents to individuals with links to terrorism. And that poses a direct threat to the national security of the United States.
And for more than a decade, the U.S. State Department has consistently found that Venezuela has maintained a permissive environment that allowed for supportive activities that benefited known terrorist groups, including Hezbollah supporters and sympathizers. But reported links between Venezuela and Hezbollah are nebulous, wide-ranging, and tough to prove. Today, Vice President Tareck El Aissami, who has Syrian and Lebanese origins, has become the focus of investigations into Venezuela's links to Hezbollah. A study in 2014 found that El Aissami has developed a sophisticated and multi-level financial network that functions as a criminal terrorist pipeline for bringing Islamic radicals to Venezuela and its neighbors, and to send illegal funds from Latin America to the Middle East. The investigation also linked El Aissami to a passport scheme that sold hundreds of Venezuelan IDs to people from the Middle East while he was interior minister between 2008 and 2012. Some of the evidence came from a Venezuelan diplomat turned whistleblower.
Por ello pagaban cantidades entre 5 y 15 mil dólares. Muchas veces estaban vinculados a grupos terroristas, en su mayoría de tendencia chiita.
Last February, the U.S. Treasury officially blacklisted El Aissami as a specially designated narcotics trafficker. Maduro's government has vehemently denied any links to the drug trade and terrorist groups. His supporters dismiss the accusations as fake news, blaming the CIA for trying to build a political case against the Venezuelan leadership. With U.S. President Trump threatening new sanctions against Caracas, Venezuela says Washington's ultimate goal is regime change. Sandra Gottman, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Washington, D.C. by Joseph Humire. He is the founder of the Center for a Secure Free Society, a national security think tank, and co-author of Iran's Strategic Penetration in Latin America. And from Beirut, political commentator Marwa Osman. She's a lecturer at the Lebanese International University and Ma'arif University. And in studio, the Newsmakers correspondent Sandra Gottman, whose voice you just heard a few moments ago. Thanks all of you for joining us. Joseph, let me begin with you. Looking at this story, there's a claim that the vice president of Venezuela, Tareck El Aissami, is connected to Hezbollah, but there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of evidence. Make the case. Tell me what's the evidence.
Well, you know, one of the biggest money laundering cases in the history of Latin America actually took place not too long ago, within the last decade, where the DEA arrested a major money launderer, Lebanese money launderer in Latin America named Ayman Juma. This case, which moved multi-million dollars and multi-ton shipments of cocaine from Latin America to the Middle East, went through the Lebanese Canadian bank and went through a used car scheme basically to launder the money. That case, which has been indicted in a federal court, which was connected to Hezbollah through the Lebanese Canadian bank, is also connected to Tareck El Aissami. Because Tareck El Aissami has a money laundering network that spreads throughout about 12 different countries throughout Latin America into the Middle East, and that money laundering network has been capitalized on by Hezbollah. He doesn't have, it's important to distinguish that Tareck El Aissami, no one has ever said, at least I haven't heard anyone say that he is Hezbollah, but he has connections to Hezbollah, and one of the people that has connected him to Hezbollah is one of the former Venezuelan diplomats, Ghazi Nasruddin, who's also wanted by the FBI and who's also sanctioned by the Department of Treasury for his connections to the Lebanese terrorist group.
Okay, so Marwa, when you hear that, does that sound solid, or does it sound like a conspiracy theory concocted in the DC Beltway?
It's a nice fairy tale, I could tell you, with the names and the name of the bank and everything that's put together by FBI and CIA files. It's even more interesting when you talk about other names, other big businessmen names in Lebanon, especially those who are from South Lebanon who work also with Africa and also with Latin America. We could use so many stories to try and create some sort of a story against anyone. You could literally make a big lie against anyone. We could start by the bank, the Canadian bank that was actually closed due to the U.S. influence against this bank that forced the Lebanese government to close the bank. Actually, what happened is that bank is used by multiple Lebanese Shias, who are literally Lebanese from the south part of Lebanon, where it is called El Hezbollah stronghold, which is, by the way, not. And they use that bank, which is also partly owned by someone who is a Shia. So it's more of a PR campaign that went on, that these businessmen started using that bank. And obviously, they have companies all across the globe. Yes, we do have billionaires, despite the fact that I'm against capitalism. But yes, we do have billionaires. And they started using this bank as part of their transactions for their companies. Now, whether or not the U.S. or U.S. intelligence would like to believe if that's the case or not, that's
Marwa, let me come in for a second. Let me ask you,
different, because
Marwa, why would the U.S. Treasury be sanctioning this individual, the vice president, and be making the case that there's a connection? Why would they be doing this if there wasn't something solid?
Let us start by the possibility of, let us start by saying that there's, yes, of course, there might be a possibility of a certain relationship between any part of the Latin American cultures or governments with the Lebanese resistance, Hezbollah. That's part of the culture. The culture there is also a culture of resistance against American imperialism. So is the culture of Hezbollah. So that's only a matter of normalcy. That's something normal to have such connections. I mean, even if we go back in time, even Che Guevara himself had connections
so let me take that.
Abdel Nasser himself.
Okay, so you say culturally.
It is part of a revolution.
Okay, so Joseph, enemy of my enemy is my friend. We like you. We have the same enemies. Fine, we're doing business together, but that doesn't mean anything nefarious is happening. Might that be the case, Joseph?
No, the nefarious things already happened. We can't forget that Hezbollah has been accused and seriously accused in Argentina of bombing one of the biggest terrorist attacks in Latin America's history, especially the largest Islamic terrorist attack in Latin America's history. But let me make a point that PR campaigns, if this is a negative smear campaign, PR campaigns don't end with federal indictments and federal convictions. The cases that I'm talking about, the case on Ayman Juma was a federal conviction that was tried in a federal court here in New York, in the United States. That's not a PR campaign. That's an actual judicial case.
If your law says that they are terrorists, it doesn't mean that they are. If your court states
not just
that
our
this
law.
person is a terrorist,
there's more than 30 countries around the world
your court
that have
is
indicted
stating,
Hezbollah.
for example, there are groups in Syria that are not terrorists, at the same time they are killing people.
I don't want to get into the discussion.
Obviously, you're going to hate Hezbollah because it has stand against Israel. You're going to hate Hezbollah because it has standing against
If you allow me to come in for a second,
Hezbollah as a terrorist group around the world.
Joseph, give me a second. I don't want to get into the discussion as to whether Hezbollah is a terrorist organization or not, because I don't think that's the focus of the discussion. What we're trying to understand here is if Hezbollah is doing bad stuff in Venezuela right now, which is claimed by the opposition. I want you to listen to what the Venezuelan opposition leader, Enrique Capriles, had to say. Have a listen to this, and I'll come back to all of you after that. Take a listen.
If the vice president has any dignity, he should resign in the next few hours. We request that prosecutors, the powers that you all know are controlled by Maduro's government, open an investigation into such serious accusations. We request all the information held by the United States to determine where the responsibility lies here.
Okay, and Sandra's next to me here. Sandra, you've been to Venezuela recently. The country is going through a tough period. It's extremely polarized. It's divided. The opposition undoubtedly jumping on this ever since January, February. Tell me how much this information about foreign meddling or Hezbollah connection is dividing the society and is being used as a political football in the country.
I think the issue of foreign meddling plays into the hands of both the government and the opposition. The government claimed that any accusations of drug trafficking, corruption, human rights abuses are all used as a pretext by governments like the US and other Western leaders to meddle in Venezuelan affairs. On the other hand, you have the opposition saying Cuba, which has very close relations with Venezuela, is an imperialist force in the hemisphere as well, and that Iran has played a strong hand in Venezuelans' affairs as well. So this is always going to be political in Venezuela. And I think while the issue of the link between the Venezuelan government and Hezbollah as an organization and a group itself hasn't really been talked about, what the Venezuelan people are interested in is money laundering, drug trafficking, and where millions and millions of dollars of Venezuelan money are going. And if that link to Hezbollah explains that, then the Venezuelan opposition are going to continue leaping on this. They have since February, when those sanctions were dropped by the US government. If anything else comes about, they will certainly use this to their advantage.
Okay, so Joseph, what we're seeing happening here? The opposition saying we're against an Iranian/Cuban imperialism in our country, whereas the government saying we're anti-Yankee imperialism, and you've got two competing narratives. Which one do you think has more evidence? You're obviously in the camp that thinks the Iranians and Cubans story checks out more.
Well, I mean, I think if you go to Venezuela, it's very clear that the government itself hasn't aligned itself with the United States. The United States has diminished its presence in terms of just personnel and activities in Venezuela. The DEA got kicked out, the defense attaches, the military group got kicked out. So the United States doesn't have the presence it has in Venezuela that it had many years ago, while at the same time, Iran, but not just Iran, Russia, China, their presence has increased over the last decade and a half. So I think the evidence is just showed on the level of economic, diplomatic, and financial footprint in the country. But beyond that, I would just touch on a point that you mentioned earlier about the nefarious side of this. So the vice president that we were talking about, Tareck El Aissami, beyond having the money laundering network, he's been accused of establishing an immigration pipeline that moves from illicit funds and drugs from Latin America to the Middle East and brings back foreign fighters. There's been cases that have been documented and proved that have shown suspected members of Hezbollah using this pipeline to change their identities, to basically say they're no longer Lebanese or Syrian, to actually become Venezuelans.
Okay, again, so Marwa, let me ask you, is there any amount of evidence that could be shown to you that would convince you that something wrong is going on?
Let us start by actually showing evidence. Let him show me evidence, and I'm all for listening, but there's no evidence on the ground. When you say that they are changing their personality, why? Where are they going? They are fighting either Israel or the Takfiris in Syria. And look, the usual US scenario or the usual US story is, oh, if they are not with us, they're definitely against us. Your guest was saying there is more presence for Russian, Chinese, and other Middle Eastern or Iranian, Persian presence in Venezuela. So what's wrong with that if they are trying to have economic ties or diplomatic ties? But that's what's wrong with that is that the U.S. doesn't want that to happen, because the U.S. wants to stay in monopoly, whether in power or in economics. Right. But that's not the case here. The case is, well, there's Hezbollah, the Hezbollah that has been fighting Israel, that has been fighting U.S. imperialism, that has led ISIS and Nusra, put literally their noses in the dirt in Syria. They have been doing this right now as we speak in Arsal on the Lebanese border with Syria as well, and they have been able to liberate the area which has been taken by ISIS and Nusra for 6 years.
And we have been talking about it, certainly.
Days. So I know this is a huge...
I don't want to, again, I don't want to go into the successes and failures of Hezbollah, and we have been talking about...
I'm telling you why they would put...
Certainly, and I got it.
I'm trying to describe to you, or to explain to you why they are trying to pin this on Hezbollah. Well, I'll continue. Yes, obviously, there must be some sort of diplomatic relations, as I told you, whether with Hugo Chavez before he passed away, or with Maduro right now, or with his vice president. What's so wrong with that? What's so wrong with that is that it's not being part of the U.S. game anymore, so that's why the U.S. will go overboard to try and pin anything against Hezbollah.
You see nefarious intent in those who are making the accusation. Now, Joseph has been bringing up very specific cases here, and that's to your credit, Joseph. Let me ask you then, Joseph, if it hurts...
Let me bring up
Joseph,
hold
on for a second. Let me ask you. You've been bringing up some very specific individuals in specific cases. Does it hurt your case when you read about people mentioning that Iran and Hezbollah have military camps actually within Venezuela, that the Iranians are mining uranium within Venezuela and that sort of thing, because those things have been proven to be falsehoods. So does it hurt the point you're trying to make when that sort of stuff gets pushed out?
There's two ways, there's two wrong reactions to understanding the problem set. One is to over-exaggerate and to state things that aren't true, or to jump to conclusions on things that perhaps aren't conclusive. And the other wrong reaction is to underestimate what they're doing. And so if I were to take an assessment, I would say we were moving more towards the latter. We have been underestimating their presence, not overreacting to the president, which is how they've been able to increase. And you know, I have been bringing up very specific examples because they asked for evidence. I'll give you another piece of evidence, and this has to do with specifically the documentation. If this had nothing to do with the United States, if it all had to do with Israel and what Hezbollah has their priorities in the Middle East, then why was one of the individuals that was linked to the 9/11 bombing, one of the individuals linked to the 9/11 bombing, a Palestinian who's connected to Hezbollah, given a Venezuelan document and sent later to Jordan? That case was examined not by me, not by U.S. authorities, it was examined by a Venezuelan government official.
Since 9/11 up until now, I've never heard any piece of evidence that says Hezbollah is
look him up. His name is Hakeem
because it's linked to your brothers in the Gulf.
Look him up. His name's Hakeem Fatah. He was arrested in a Jordanian court and was mentioned in the Jordanian court that he is from Hezbollah, Latin America.
And the IDs of the people who committed the crime of 9/11.
And I'm giving you evidence.
And trust me, our Hezbollah would not do that because they don't need to do that. You should look up your Saudi friends and your UAE friends.
I didn't say Hezbollah committed.
I didn't say Hezbollah committed
9/11. I say he was linked to 9/11 by taking one of the
schools
in Florida, the pilot
How
schools
can
with
that be
Ani
any
Anor.
sort of evidence?
Okay, well, we're all going to look at it.
Anyone who committed any crime can have
Marwa,
a family member who actually works in Hezbollah. How can that be an evidence?
He made a point. We'll look at it. I mean, maybe we'll have him back on the show, you know, if there's much more to this. Let me ask you, Sandra, about this claim now that former US President Barack Obama stopped an investigation into links with between Iran, Venezuela, and Hezbollah. This was reported by a Spanish newspaper, ABC, from a former Obama administration official, right, an insider. So this was sort of to preserve the Iran deal, to preserve those relations, warming relations with Cuba. This was the claim. It can't be absolutely verified independently. But tell me how that news has played out, Sandra, in the past, week and a half since it came out?
Well, what we can take from that revelation, or the alleged revelation that Obama had, under Obama, there was an investigation into specific links between Venezuela and the financing of Hezbollah. The fact that there was now a shift under President Trump, that as soon as he took office in February, sanctions were placed on El Aissami, and that a change in policy was markedly seen. I think that just escalates the political rhetoric. You have Donald Trump now up against President Nicolás Maduro. Nicolás Maduro is saying, get out of Venezuela. Trump now re-escalating, saying we will place new sanctions on more of your top officials. More than a dozen officials in the Venezuelan government are already sanctioned if Venezuela goes on with this new constituent assembly. So we're seeing a ramping up of tension between the two countries, and politically, I think this could be very toxic for both sides.
I must say, you know, this story, I was a little bit nervous about it because there were a lot of tenuous threads here. Nothing was absolutely rock solid. But as we explored it, I'm really glad we had this conversation. It's an important conversation to have. Sandra, Marwa, and Joseph, unfortunately, I've got to move on, but thank you all for joining us.